Here's the thing about Batman. This version is just as valid as this version, is just as valid as this version, and so on, and so on, and so on. Batman is difficult to characterize because there are so many different ways to interpret him, and each portrayal is bound to be someone's favorite, by which they compare all other versions. And yet, in his 80-year history, there is one incarnation that is almost universally regarded as the definitive Batman. You know the one.
Right off the bat with this first episode, we wanted to kind of make a statement, as it were. We wanted to say right away that this is not any other version of Batman than you've ever seen. It's not the Adam West version. It's not Tim Burton's version. It's not, Super Friends. Certainly not Super Friends. It was our Batman. It was what we considered to be kind of the best of Batman.
In 1989, Warner Brothers' live-action Tim Burton Batman film changed the general public's perception of the character. Until that point, most people unfamiliar with the comics still associated him with the spirited but absurd version portrayed by Adam West. That campy portrayal is what really made Batman a popular icon for a generation, but it was a far cry from the crime drama fans knew from the comics. His appearance in Filmation's Super Friends didn't lend Batman any more gravity in the medium of animation either. Before that year, Warner Brothers Animation had been almost inoperative for decades. But 1989 saw production begin in earnest on Tiny Toon Adventures, a collaboration between Warner Brothers and Steven Spielberg that had been gestating for a few years at this point. Among the artists hired by Warner Animation president Gene McCurdy to develop the show were writer Tom Ruegger, storyboard artist Bruce Timm, background painter Eric Radomski, and background designer Ted Blackman. Following the massive impact of Tim Burton's film, not only had public perception of Batman returned to that of a somber, avenging vigilante, but there was an insatiable appetite for more. Tiny Toons even did a parody short titled Bats All Folks, which had some surprisingly earnest fandom on display. There's dialogue from Batman's first comic book appearance and an homage to the artwork in The Dark Knight Returns. Partially responsible for writing the spoof was Paul Dini, and branching out from his usual role as model designer and storyboard artist Bruce Timm. In 1990, McCurdy held an open meeting with her staff, inviting them to submit pitches for animation projects outside of Looney Tunes. One property up for grabs was Batman. And that is why so many grown men in Gotham read Tiny Toon Adventures comic books. Following the meeting, Bruce Timm went back to his desk and within an hour had drawn a model sheet for his rendition of Batman. Background painter Eric Radomski revisited a painting technique he had experimented with when he was younger that he believed would successfully render the shadowy world of Gotham. Starting with a solid black background, he used limited highlights to suggest details and let the viewer's imagination fill in the rest. Timm and Radomski had no idea that they were both separately submitting proposals for the animated Batman project. McCurdy saw the potential for combining their individual styles and paired them up, adding background designer Ted Blackman to produce a 2-minute proof of concept. They sent their finished backgrounds and storyboards to be animated, and the finished short was accompanied by a piece of music from Danny Elfman's Batman score. Before the proof of concept was even finished, they learned that the WB had already greenlit a Batman animated series. Timm and Radomski hoped that they could leverage completed demo footage into working on the series as artists. To their surprise, the proof of concept led the studio to put them in charge of the entire series. They were given the go-ahead to create the full series with an air date of September 1992. To give an idea of how fully formed the visuals for Batman the Animated Series were from the get-go, that 2-minute presentation short essentially established the house style for the artist, and was clearly the blueprint for the opening sequence. They knew what they wanted their Gotham to feel like. It was going to be timeless. Batman had a supercomputer, but TV was black and white. When in doubt, writers were advised to keep New York in mind and then exaggerate it. Their Gotham was set in ink, and their Batman was already looking great. But who was he? Paul Dini, a Tiny Toons Adventures writing alumni who co-wrote Bats All Folks with prior credits including He-Man and Transformers, said that the look of the show was established with comparative ease. Writing the show was another matter. Several of the early scripts had to be scrapped. The stories weren't living up to the intensity and drama that the dark deco art style demanded. The writing staff was finding it difficult to solidify who their Batman was, the tone of the world he inhabited, and the kind of trials he should undergo. The team needed to create the blueprint they would use to translate the character from comics to screen. To analyze how they did this, we're going to be looking at 3 documents, all 3 of which I'll provide the links for below if you want to follow along or nerd out over later. First is this photograph of me about the time of the release of Batman the Animated Series. No, really, the actual first document is the November 1990 draft of the series Writer's Bible by Paul Dini, along with Bruce Timm and screenwriter Mitch Bryan, who would go on to write the first episode. A series Bible, for those who don't know, is a reference document used by the various writers that come and go from a show's staff to maintain a uniform vision. Sometimes they're developed as a tool to keep track of details as the series evolves over time, but they're just as often created during the early stages of development as a way to take a growing concept and focus it, so all the writers will be on the same page. Though Dini obviously had a keen interest in Batman, he still had full-time writing duties for Tiny Toons he had to return to before completion of a second draft of the show Bible, though he would later return and contribute to writing over a dozen episodes. In the meantime, our second document is the updated April 1991 All-New Writer's Guide by Tom Ruegger, which, despite its name, includes a lot of material found in the first draft, but it does include a handful of key updates. Ruegger, you'll recall, was a Tiny Toons alumni who had also written for Pinky and the Brain and Animaniacs. Aside from finalizing the series Bible, he was also able to exercise his talent for writing suspense and drama as a writer on a handful of iconic episodes such as It's Never Too Late, Beware the Grey Ghost, and Pretty Poison. Which brings us to our final document, the May 6, 1991 final draft script for the 5th episode to be produced, Pretty Poison. Written by Ruegger from a story by Dini, Michael Reeves, and Chris Yoon, it would become the 9th episode aired on September 14th, 1992, and the first appearance of villain Poison Ivy. Sorry, spoilers ahead if you didn't know that Pamela Isley is Poison Ivy. The script will provide an interesting look at how the guidelines set forth in the series Bibles helped writers navigate the scripting of an actual episode, and in what ways some of the rules were bucked in the writing process. Under the heading General Series Concepts, you'll find a broad strokes philosophy for this version of Batman. Influences are cited as coming from crime novels and films from the 1940s. There's also an express desire to combine old and new in a way that delivers on the promise of the darker look and tone set by the dark deco art style. Immediately following is the heading What Has Changed, where we'll see the team's first efforts to define this Batman for themselves. In describing Batman's origins, the Bible puts its foot down in no uncertain terms. Now that we've dealt with his origins, we can put it out of the way for the remainder of the series. We'll say it here first. In the run of our series, we will do no stories about Batman's origin. Say it in all caps for the people in the back, please. They add, that's been done to death in the comics, and it is not the Batman series we're doing today. What follows is a list showing how our Batman will differ from all the previous versions. From there, 4 initial rules are laid out. Number 1, Batman is a solo act. Robin and Alfred are in the picture, but ultimately it's Batman's show. Number 2, Batman doesn't work directly with the police. This ruled out any way for the GCPD to contact him, including the bat signal. They decided if he needs to inform the police of anything, he'll phone them. Ultimately, this rule was vetoed by Alan Burnett, a writer and Batman fan who had worked with Gene McCurdy in the past at Hanna-Barbera, where together they had tried to pitch the idea of a serious Batman. Seriousness has its limits, however, and when Burnett joined the staff, he missed the bat signal because it looked cool. It does look cool. And he brought it back.
Got a new toy, I see.
Rule number 3, Robin is not Batman's full-time partner.
No, Dick. This is my hunt.
This presented an interesting take on Robin as college-aged and an infrequent guest star, the rule of thumb being to feature him in about every third episode. But this would change by the second season, when Fox wanted Robin in every episode, the assumption being that Kenner would be able to sell more toys to kids if there was a kid in the show more. They even changed the title from Batman the Animated Series to The Adventures of Batman and Robin. Finally, number 4 is the stories are to be hard-edged crime dramas with villains who play for keeps. Moving on, the Bible offers an outline for the writing style and structure to begin molding what kind of stories the series would tell. Dini stressed economic, well-structured plots with snappy dialogue and characters whose actions are motivated and believable. There was a lot of thought put into the brand of humor the series would adopt. It was to arise naturally from the larger-than-life characters and never from tongue-in-cheek campiness. Camp, after all, being kind of a dirty word after the Adam West series. Dry lines and tough situations, comments about outlandishness of costume villains are within the realistic context of our Batman. For villains, dark humor and clever dialogue is great, as long as it realistically reflects the character's wit as opposed to the writer's.
I'll let you off if you promise to do a little favor for me.
Oh, okay. What?
I don't know! I haven't thought of it yet! Okay, Chaz. When Harley knocks on the door 3 times, you open it.
And?
That's it.
Wait, that's the favor? You called me here just to open a door?
Well, look at the size of that cake, man! She can't open the door and push it in all at once. Think!
Pop culture references were to be kept to a minimum, as they wanted the humor to hold up for 10 to 20 years.
Oh, don't worry, I'm over the crime thing, see?
There's also a strong emphasis on visual storytelling, in opposition to expositional dialogue, and an encouragement to take advantage of animation's ability to build large-scale sets and special effects that could never be done in live action. The all-new Writer's Guide doubles down on these ideas, and in addition to reiterating the desire for larger-than-life sets and tightly plotted 20-minute mini-movies, it begins diving in on defining Batman. In our series, Batman is in the early phases of his crime-fighting career, often at odds with the police, many of whom regard him as a vigilante and menace to the city. Few, besides Commissioner Gordon, realize the powerful guardian Gotham has in Batman.
Have pity on an old man's blood pressure.
The Batman will be portrayed as Gotham City's grim avenger of evil, appearing only at night. He will use his sophisticated gadgetry, shrewd detective skills, and frightening image to combat Gotham's criminals. He will speak only when necessary, and then only in short, terse sentences.
Who are you? I'm your worst nightmare.
The hell are you supposed to be?
I'm vengeance.
This is not the last time you're going to wonder if the Batman writers Matt Reeves, Peter Craig, and Mattson Tomlin pored over these documents while defining their Batman. The Batman. I'm not going to do this bit every time, so let's just look at it one last time, and you can just, think it to yourself from here on out. Here we go. Back to who Batman is. Batman is obsessed. A guy who gets decked out in a bat costume and roams the city at night to help the innocent and thwart villains is not a normal guy. He is driven by a personal obsession to avenge the death of his parents at the hands of criminals. Batman is a tortured hero. He feels very deeply and wants to spare others from the pain he felt when his parents died. Please attempt to capture the deep feelings of Batman in your stories. Please attempt to capture the deep feelings of Batman. It's such a funny thing to read, but damn if they didn't pull it off with details like this photo Bruce gave Dick to take to college, or how he mourns Harvey Dent's plight, or loses it when he feels responsible for Gordon getting injured on the job. The heart of the series. The villains are nuts, Batman's a little scary, the police are overworked. Where does the warmth or heart come from in this series? Well, it comes from the Batman's very personal quest, his depth of feeling, and his genuine concern for the victims of crime.
What is this place?
A drug rehab center.
No, I ain't going in. Your 10-cent tour of the city's over. So, what could it hurt? One little look, right? Joey!
Yes, and he's lucky. He'll pull through.
Connie! Why didn't you call me?
I didn't know until today. I'd never have known if it weren't for Batman. Don't get any closer. The nurse said not to disturb him.
I'll find the guy who got him hooked.
Just look in the mirror. It was your drugs and your people who sell them. I left you to get away from what you're doing. Our son wasn't so lucky.
Help stop it, Stromwell. All your power and money has bought you as an empire of misery.
What do you want me to do?
Close down the organization. Talk to the DA. Turn in all the records. It has to stop, Stromwell. It has to stop. Now.
Also, the heart of a story can come from the innocent people whose lives are made better by the existence of Batman.
So I'm heading back home. And I guess I kind of owe it to you, Batman. You probably saved my life. I bet you hear this all the time. Look, I'm gonna miss my bus. I'll see you around. And thanks.
We hope to show that Batman truly cares about people, and that his reason for existence is not to punch bad guys in the face.
Risking your butt for someone who's never given you anything but trouble.
I know what it's like to try and rebuild a life. I had a bad day too, once.
Nice guys like you shouldn't have bad days.
But rather to give good people in Gotham a chance to thrive. They of course establish his refusal to kill, but allow for him to use scare tactics like hanging a criminal over a ledge.
For the love of mercy, Batman, don't let me fall!
Or this insanity where he questions a goon by hooking him to the front of the Batwing and raking him across the water in Gotham Harbor? Jesus, Batman.
He fainted.
Batman appears only at night. Batman is a mysterious character whose effectiveness is assisted by the shadows of the night. He lurks in darkness and strikes with surprise. Keep Batman in the shadows. Maintain Batman's mysterious quality, especially in Act 1. He works best in small doses. He is a presence, a mysterious figure that comes and goes like a fog, a fleeting shadow seen out of the corner of your eye, but then he's gone. Whenever possible, keep him watching from the wings, lurking in the shadows. Keep him away from center screen until the time is right for him to strike. There should be a great satisfaction when he ultimately leaps into action. Staying true to the Batman's original conception as the world's greatest detective, we want to stress his mental abilities, whether he's assembling clues in a case or using his vast scientific knowledge in the Batcave's laboratory. Overall, the directive was to keep anything that worked in the past, ditch anything that didn't, and improve on the rest. Incorporate many different elements of Batman mythology, but have a darker look and tone to it, like the movie version and recent comics. From there, they move on to begin characterizing Bruce Wayne, beginning with the bombshell that Bruce is the disguise and Batman is his true persona. In public, he behaves like a jaded, jet-setting playboy.
When your father was alive, Wayne was a name that commanded great respect. Now all Wayne stands for is a self-centered, jet-setting playboy. It's lucky your father didn't live to see what you've done to his good name. He'd have died of shame.
But when out of the public eye, his personality immediately returns to that of Batman. Even when he's alone with Alfred, he carries himself like Batman. Given a choice, he'd spend every hour of the day in Batman mode.
It's called multiple personality syndrome disorder, Alfred. 2 personalities in one brain, completely separate.
Wayne Manor, one moment, please. A call for Master Bruce from a Dr. March.
Hey, what's up, Doc?
This duality is highlighted nicely in a bit early in the script for Pretty Poison, where Harvey describes his pleasure seeker friend Bruce, and we get to see Bruce living his truth as Batman.
Bruce runs around with a high-class crowd. but he still manages to get his kicks.
There's also something great about how Bruce soaks up being labeled as crazy.
Spend some time with your crazy friend.
You think I'm crazy, don't you?
In what sense, Master Bruce?
Seriously.
On the topic of crazy, the show Bible had some interesting things to say about how they portrayed the villains and their motivations. Most notably, Batman takes into account that his villains' origins are nearly as dark as his own. Some were almost heroes. Nowhere was this more obvious than in the way the series reinvented Mr. Freeze, who had just been an excuse for ice-based gimmicks up until this point. Interestingly, in both versions of the show Bible, his characterization hadn't been nailed down yet. He was a shifty cryogenics expert running a body freezing scam, knocked into a cryogenics chamber by Batman, who cares nothing for innocents who may get hurt. But in writing an episode for him, Paul Dini took to heart the challenge to make some of Batman's rogues gallery more sympathetic and create a man who thought all emotion had been frozen out of him. Dini says he came up with the final image first, of a man's tear turning into a snowflake, then showing a flurry of snow coming from his cell to suggest that the man was weeping. It's a really strong image that they really didn't express well in the final animation. Kind of frustrating. In an effort to steer clear of the abundance of ridiculous trapping Batman plots of the 60s series, they set a rule for villains, to avoid them all being driven by the need to get rid of Batman. Batman is a nuisance to their plans, not their goal. Joker and Two-Face are the only villains obsessed with destroying Batman. The Bible insists writers put thought into the eternal logic of a villain's actions. What do they want, and what do they plan on doing when they get it? Writers were also encouraged to consult the comics to find other colorful criminals and even create some of their own. Popular villainess Harley Quinn was created whole cloth as a henchman for the Joker in Joker's favor.
It is to laugh, huh, Mr. J?
We can use any of Batman's fantastic array of villains. Our series should not be limited to the freak of the day. Don't rule out gangsters, crooked politicians, locked door mysteries, or the occasional technological threat to spark a story. The stories in the series were meant to be tightly plotted mini-movies, and so the Bible laid out a cinematic 3-act structure for writers to follow. Each act was to contain action sequences and plot development that build to a final conclusion, which would feature a major action set piece. Act 1. Setup. The tone and story direction are established. Introduce characters and their agendas. Stories that have a unified sense of place will always work better. Locations, especially the climax, should be adequately established and foreshadowed. The first episode does a terrific job with all this right out of the gate. They do a great fake out where you assume that the police flying in this Art Deco police blimp encounter Batman in the skies above Gotham.
I didn't see anything. It was there. Whatever it is must be right below us. There it is.
There what is?
It looked like bat wings.
When really it's the episode's villain, the Man-Bat. Batman would later face his villain in a climax featuring the same location. Act 2, the story develops, tension increases, counter moves are made by adversaries, rising action becomes unstoppable and headed for the inevitable conclusion. Each act would be separated by a commercial break, so it was important for writers to include an act break cliffhanger to keep the audience hooked in creative ways. Writers were also to save something big for the third act. The action must always build to the big finish. Act 3, climax and resolution. When possible, Act 3 should be staged in a larger-than-life location. Whatever is established in Act 1 and 2 must be paid off and resolved in a satisfying ending. Let's bring this video to a satisfying ending by completing our analysis of Pretty Poison, originally titled The Rose and the Thorn. We're off to a good start because that is definitely an upgrade in the title. Quick formatting note worth pointing out is that the script actually calls out the act breaks, and there's an interesting phenomenon where the script is 46 pages long. It's by no means a science, but the rough metric is that scripts come out to about a minute of content per page, so it's interesting that the page count here is double what you'd expect. And as we dive in, you'll see that there's not much in the script that doesn't make it to the episode. I haven't read many animation scripts, so maybe the fact that the footage is being created whole cloth demands more description. If you're watching this and you know more about screenwriting for animation than I do, keep it to yourself. This is my video. I will not have you eroding my aptness. I won't have it. An unseen gardener plucks a rose. We get a flashback to a groundbreaking ceremony for a new prison. God, Gotham's such a shithole. Led by the mayor and funded by Bruce Wayne. Turns out this prison was a bit of a passion project for Harvey Dent. A newspaper clipping of this event is torn out and pinned to a board. Somebody is super interested in this. And the penitentiary construction is underway, completely decimating a field where a bunch of flowers once bloomed. I think you can see where this is going. There is a jump to 5 years later, and this cleverly transitions to a scene of a convict escaping from the prison. We get a sequence of that character-based humor the Bible suggested with this bit where Gordon gets the call about the escaped prisoner.
This is Gordon. What? We've got a prison break by air. The chopper's heading this way.
Batman is already on the scene. There's an establishing shot of the Rose Cafe, which stands in for a surprising amount of description that was in the script. Harvey Dent is there out on a date with Pamela Isley. Bruce is supposed to be joining them, but as Harvey explains, dude is always late. This is where we get that extended bit of comedic irony we saw earlier.
Who are you? I'm your worst nightmare.
The line, "I'm Batman," becomes "I'm your worst nightmare" at some point in production, swapping a phrase lifted directly from the movie.
What are you? I'm Batman.
For a phrase listed directly from the show Bible. One of the prison escape goons is raving about being attacked by a creature with big wings.
Big wings!
And hey, it's the first appearance of Renee Montoya, ladies and gentlemen. She expresses her disbelief.
Yeah, big wings. Move it along, pal.
And this paints a picture of Gotham still not being familiar with Batman. Again, this is supposed to be early in his career, so there are a handful of people who are aware of him, but we've still got both cops and criminals who are unsure to what degree he's even real.
Wow, he's really out there.
The show Bible specified the timeless quality the series was to have, and it's one of the aspects the show got right pretty much across the board. You can tell because in this scene where Batman rushes to get his dinner as Bruce, reading a modern word like Lamborghini in the script is as weird as hearing the word Lamborghini said by Michael Caine.
Lamborghini.
Bruce proves himself a dependable wingman, and the date goes well until Pamela has to leave, and even the world's greatest detective can't figure out where to look during an uncomfortably long kiss. Harvey confides in Bruce that he intends to ask Pamela to marry him. Within minutes, he is deathly ill. And with that compelling little story beat, we break into Act 2.
Get his blood pressure.
Get the EKG and move him into OR ICU number 3 stat.
Doctors are desperately rushing Harvey into the emergency room, and the sound guy is desperately using the same piece of dialogue from the doctor seconds apart.
Get the EKG and move him into the OR ICU number 3 stat.
I don't know what happened there. There's a second round of the Gordon gets bad news bit when he learns about Harvey.
This is Gordon. What?
It's written exactly the same, but animated with different shots, and the script actually even says basically this is the same police station sequence we saw earlier. So there's an argument to be made that it could have been funnier if it were shot for shot identical, and it definitely would have saved some time and money, but that's just me. I don't know, maybe make the right decision next time. Bruce learns that Harvey has been poisoned, and someone needs to find an antidote fast if he's going to pull through and live a long, healthy life free from worry. The script has a quick flashback where Bruce thinks back on what Harvey ate, but it's not in the episode. He steals one of Dent's blood samples because you know our boy is going to start working on an antidote. Following that is a scene of Bullock interrogating the staff from the restaurant, and it's trimmed down a lot from what's in the script. There's actually kind of a lame gag where Bullock thinks that chocolate mousse has real mousse in it, and it's kind of lampshaded by Gordon's incredulity over that mix up, but the whole joke is mercifully cut out because it doesn't quite meet the standards for humor laid out in the series Bible. Batman is now in his lab, and as set forth in the Bible, even when it's just him and Alfred, he's still talking and acting like Batman. He's using his Bat computer to analyze the blood sample, and the series Bible had a bit to say about to what degree the Bat computer could be utilized, smartly stating that it could give him information, but not solutions. So in this case, it informs Batman that the toxin in Harvey's blood is from a specific flower, but creating an antidote will prove impossible, Alfred discovers, because it has been extinct for 5 years. Hey, isn't 5 years ago when they built we are reintroduced to the mysterious gardener? Turns out they have one of those exact toxic roses, and this transition here successfully communicates that clue visually. Pamela meets up with Bruce at the hospital to visit Harvey. She doesn't look like the female version of Death, which it says in the script, and she's also not carrying roses like the script says, probably because that would communicate too much visually. As Bruce consoles her, she attempts to give him a kiss. It's quick, but he deflects with a hug, and he's reminded of the kiss she planted on Harvey. He doesn't even wait to get home to start digging up info on her.
Pamela Isley. Who she is, where she's been, what she does, the works.
We do miss an opportunity to hear Batman use the expression, the whole enchilada. By the time he reaches the Batcave, this time he's in Bruce clothes, still talking like Batman to Alfred.
What do you have, Alfred?
Alfred is already all over it, and he finds that Pamela is a chemist working with a cosmetics firm. Now, this is neither here nor there, but look at this ad for her new product, Nightshade.
Their newest is a perfume called Nightshade.
It's deadly.
Like, that's not even an innuendo, that's just real scary. That closes out Act 2 in the script, but the actual episode is paced out a little bit differently. The script has the Batmobile race into Gotham as the closing image of Act 2, and maybe that just wasn't considered strong enough to serve as like a final sting for the act. So the episode continues right along with Batman arriving at Pamela's house, which has a tremendous greenhouse. So don't throw stones. I love jokes just for the reader. This impressive setting is in line with the insistence that the episode have a strong sense of space and go all out with the arena of the climax. The gardener is revealed to be Pamela. She steps into her lair and plays music. The script calls for it to be It's in His Kiss by Betty Everett. I don't know what budget Tom thought that they were playing with, but instead the scene gets a great piece of score from Shirley Walker. She is a huge piece of the puzzle that accounts for the series' success. Just mentioning her didn't fit in neatly anywhere else in this video, specifically about the writing, but here it is. As written, Batman totters on the edge of a pit, but it's a bit more exciting in the episode because he actually falls into this trap full of cactus that are described as moving like the spines on a sea urchin. He gets out and we're introduced to the fly trap, described as more like the creature from Alien than the one in Little Shop of Horrors. The script says that it roars like Rodan. And now we get to the break into Act 3. Batman is kicking furiously at this freaking plant. They try to make a big reveal of Poison Ivy in her full costume. The Bible mentions that with the exception of Joker and Penguin and Catwoman, each time we meet a Batman villain, it's Batman's first encounter with them as well. So they were kind of trying to make a meal out of her first arrival, and she's written as being hidden or in silhouette a few times, but the animation spoils it pretty early. Like, guys, come on, they were clearly trying to do something here. Poison Ivy accuses Harvey of murder. The victims were the Field of Flowers, thus paying off the connection at the beginning of the episode, as well as making good on the demand that writers put thought into the internal logic of a villain's actions. Ivy actually wants nothing to do with Batman. In fact, she wants revenge on Bruce for his part at the construction of the prison, but her motivations have put her on a collision course with the Dark Knight. She puts on the lipstick that poisoned Harvey. This is a slight update to her character to make her more grounded, as in the comics up to this point she's portrayed as having the power to produce poison from her body at will, usually administered through a kiss. And she does. She gives Batman the long kiss of death. About 3 seconds should do it. This script is a treasure. There's a reference to the cooties, which either slipped through their filter for popular references.
Afraid I have cooties?
Or they thought we'd still be worried about cooties in 10 or 20 years. I'll follow their lead and keep this video evergreen by not making a snarky coronavirus joke here. It's killing me, but I'll do it. It's revealed that Ivy has derived an antidote from the same flower specimen she made the toxin with. Batman uses his wits and pretends to be in a more advanced state of poisoning than he is. The monster plant's name is Aloysius in the script. I just thought you should know that. And there's also a beat in the script where Batman spits and we see it sizzle on the ground because it's tainted by poison. This doesn't make it to the episode, but it's an important detail in the script because in that version, he defeats a flytrap by spitting in its mouth.
Is it getting warm in here?
The flytrap claws at itself trying to get relief from the poison. It's hard to say why this was changed, but being a kids show, they did often run afoul of broadcast standards and practices. For example, they needed to avoid imitable violence so kids wouldn't hurt themselves trying to do what they saw on TV, and a slew of other censor issues. So whatever the reason, in the final episodes, he slips a blade from his belt and cuts himself free from the flytrap. And hey, it roars like Rodan. Poison Ivy fires at Batman with her crossbow, and there's a sweet Robin Hood Prince of Thieves name drop in there. During their fight, a bank of grow lights falls and starts a raging fire, which starts blowing out glass in the greenhouse, perfectly in line with the imperative that each episode will also feature a big set piece, an incredible visual action that will be a look forward to element in each show. This will be the climax, centerpiece, the showstopper of each episode. Speaking of showstoppers, I want to grind this to a halt, because in the script, there is an entire third Gordon getting bad news sequence where it plays out the same, where they all rush out, only this time he yells back for Bullock to move instead of going back for a donut. It was probably cut for time, but it's criminal that this bit didn't get to play out the way it was intended. Finally, Batman takes Ivy's endangered rose as leverage to make her hand over the antidote, which she does. The script and episode both wrap up with Harvey waking up, Bruce telling him that Pamela is wrong for him, and they both live happily ever after, best friends forever. Poison Ivy ends up in the very prison whose construction set her on her murder's path. She is both completely unremorseful and still in possession of her plant. But don't all the best Batman stories end with their villains obsessing over the next time they can encounter him? And who are we to judge? We keep coming back for more. There have been so many interpretations of the Cape Crusade in the last 80 years. You would think that we would have had enough, but nothing could be further from the truth. It's only fitting that we are so consumed by the character. Batman's story, after all, is one of obsession. Maybe I'm projecting because, again, this was me at 6 years old. But I'm willing to bet a lot of you find yourselves returning again and again, even as the tone and characterization prove ever dynamic, always fluid. We're obsessed with the drive for justice that can only persist in someone who's encountered absolute darkness, obsessed with a decayed city giving birth to a strict moral code that we see across all iterations of the character. We like everything Batman is, even if we do each have our Batman.